I was sitting in my own living room, signing over 14 senior care facilities to my son, when my daughter-in-law placed a cup of chamomile tea in front of me with the warmest smile I had ever seen. But Rosa, my housekeeper, suddenly gripped my wrist under the table and whispered 3 words that saved my life. "Spit it out." 20 seconds later, Vanessa was the one choking on the floor, not me. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here. Before we continue, please like the video, subscribe, and comment where you are watching from today. A quick note, this is a fictional story with dramatized details for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real people is purely coincidental, but the message is intended to be meaningful and lasting. The afternoon sun cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Scottsdale estate like a blade wrapped in gold. October 15th, 2025. I remember the exact color of the light because it was the last time my living room would ever feel like home. The desert heat pressed against the glass, but inside, the air conditioning hummed at 68 degrees. The temperature Vanessa always insisted upon because she claimed it preserved the potency of her herbal blends. I sat at the head of my mesquite wood table, the same table where I had signed the papers that turned a struggling nurse's savings into a $42 million empire. My name is Margaret Holloway. People call me Maggie. I am 73 years old, and until that afternoon, I believed my greatest achievement was building 14 senior living communities. I did not yet understand that my greatest achievement would be surviving the people who wanted me dead. Derek, my 42-year-old son, paced behind my chair with a rhythm that felt less like impatience and more like a countdown. He tapped his pen against the succession documents, the sound echoing like a heartbeat in the wrong chest. "Just sign it, Mom." His voice was silk pulled tight over broken glass. "Then you can finally enjoy retirement." Vanessa entered from the kitchen carrying a porcelain tray, her movements so graceful they seemed choreographed. At 37, my daughter-in-law possessed the kind of beauty that made people forget to question her intentions. She set the cup before me. "Chamomile," she said, "with honey and something special for my heart palpitations." The steam carried a sweetness that had grown cloying over the past 4 months. A sweetness I had learned to associate with the fog that ate my memories and made my hands shake like leaves in a monsoon wind. "Drink up, Maggie dear." She whispered it like a lullaby. "You know how much better you feel after your afternoon tea. Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone you welcomed into your family and realized you were staring at something hollow?" I looked at Vanessa and saw the mask for the first time, not because it had changed, but because the edges had finally slipped. Rosa Delgado stood by the sideboard, her 62-year-old frame rigid as desert ironwood. She had been my housekeeper for 8 years, but on this afternoon, her hands were vibrating with a terror so primal that the silver tray she held rattled like a warning bell in a collapsing mine. I reached for the cup. The porcelain was warm against my palm. Beneath the chamomile, something bitter, something that tasted of endings. Then I felt it. Rosa's hand gripped my left wrist beneath the table with a force that shocked me. Her thumb pressed into my pulse point so hard, I could feel my own heartbeat hammering back against her skin. "Spit it out." Her voice was barely a breath. "Whatever you do, do not swallow." I had not yet taken a sip, but the rim against my lips now felt like the barrel of a gun withdrawing. I set the cup down with the steadiness of a woman who spent 30 years as a nurse and knew that panic killed faster than poison. The room erupted. Rosa lunged forward with the desperate precision of a soldier throwing herself on a grenade. Her tray crashed against the table, sending cups scattering across polished mesquite like porcelain dice in a game where my life was the wager. In the chaos of clattering silver and splashing liquid, the cups became indistinguishable. A shell game played at the speed of survival. Vanessa's composure cracked. A flash of something reptilian behind those hazel eyes. Then the mask returned, but her breathing had changed. Quick, shallow, the rhythm of a predator whose trap had been disturbed. She reached for a cup in her desperate need to calm her shaking hands, certain she knew which vessel was safe. She grabbed the one nearest to center and drained it in 3 swallows, her throat working with the urgency of a woman trying to regain control. She set it down with a click that sounded like the closing of a casket. Have you ever watched karma arrive in real time? It does not announce itself with thunder. It arrives in the quiet space between one heartbeat and the next. Vanessa's pupils constricted to pinpoints. Her manicured fingers clawed at the table edge, nails screeching against mesquite as her world began to tilt. The transition from composure to agony was instantaneous, a switch flipped by the very poison she had been feeding me for 4 months. Her back arched so violently that her chair crashed onto the terracotta tile. A sound escaped her throat. Not a scream, but a rattle. The sound of a body betraying its owner. Derek rushed forward, but not with the panic of a loving husband. With the urgency of a man whose investment was crashing. He blocked my view of Vanessa's clawing hand, the hand reaching toward the tea tray in a silent, dying accusation. I stood frozen, watching the architect of my murder drown in her own blueprint. Rosa gripped my arm, fingers trembling, but eyes made of steel. The woman who cleaned my floors had just saved my life with 3 words and a shaking hand. Sirens arrived 11 minutes later, painting my living room in red and blue. But as paramedics swarmed over Vanessa's convulsing body, I watched my son. Derek did not ride in the ambulance. He turned back toward my desk, eyes already searching for the unsigned contracts. That single act told me everything his mouth never would. This was not a spontaneous act of evil. This was the final chapter of a story written in my bloodstream for 5 months. A story that began with a simple cup of chamomile tea on a bright afternoon in May. Memory is a cruel cartographer. It draws the map of your destruction in colors so warm you mistake them for sunlight. Standing in that chaos of sirens and shattered porcelain, my mind pulled me backward, 5 months backward to the bright afternoon when the first drop of death touched my lips disguised as love. May 1st, 2025. The Arizona sun hung low over my Scottsdale estate, drenching the patio in a gold so pure it felt like a blessing. I sat in my garden chair, watching a pair of cactus wrens build a nest in the saguaro by the pool house, feeling the kind of contentment that only comes from knowing you have built something that will outlast you. 14 senior living communities, $42 million. 3,000 elderly residents who called my facilities home. Not bad for a girl who started as a night shift nurse in a Tucson emergency room 44 years ago, with nothing but a pair of white shoes and a spine made of Arizona limestone. I had spent 3 decades on hospital floors stitching wounds, holding hands through final breaths, learning the smell of death before it arrived. When I finally left nursing at 51, I carried something more valuable than a pension. I carried the knowledge of exactly how the elderly are failed by the systems meant to protect them. So I built my own. Holloway Senior Living was not just a business. It was a correction. A fortress where no one would die alone, or afraid, or forgotten. That afternoon, Derek found me in the garden. He had driven over from his office at our Phoenix headquarters with Vanessa beside him, her designer sunglasses catching the light like polished weapons. My son leaned against the patio railing with the easy confidence of a man who had been handed everything and mistaken it for something he had earned. Mom, Vanessa and I have been talking. He gestured toward his wife, who stood by the sliding glass doors with a porcelain tray balanced on one hand. You work too hard. The stress is not good for your heart. We think Vanessa should take over your daily nutrition smoothies. Supplements. Maybe some herbal teas. She has been researching holistic approaches for women your age, women my age. The phrase landed like a pebble in still water, sending ripples of something I could not quite name. But I smiled because he was my son, and the afternoon was beautiful. And Vanessa was already walking toward me with a cup that smelled of chamomile and honey. I made this blend myself, Maggie. Vanessa set it before me, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear, with a gesture that seemed rehearsed for its casualness. Chamomile, for calm, a touch of lavender, and a special addition for heart health. You are the foundation of this family, We need to keep you strong." I noticed her other hand lingered near the pocket of her linen pants, where the outline of a small glass vial pressed against the fabric. I dismissed it as a sweetener, or perhaps a supplement she had already mixed in. Trust is a blindfold we sew ourselves, stitch by comfortable stitch, until the world goes dark, and we call it peace. The tea was warm, slightly bitter beneath the honey. I mentioned it, and Vanessa laughed a sound like wind chimes made of surgical steel. "That is the lavender," she said. "An acquired taste. Give it a week." I gave it a week. Then 2. Then a month. Every afternoon at 4 o'clock, without fail, Vanessa appeared with her chamomile ritual. She was consistent in a way that felt like devotion. I did not recognize it then for what it truly was. Precision. By the end of that first week, I noticed the foxglove. Vanessa had planted an entire row of the purple bell-shaped flowers along the garden wall, digitalis purpurea, though she called them by their common name and claimed they attracted hummingbirds. They were beautiful. Elegant spires of violet that swayed in the desert wind, like mourners at a funeral they had arranged themselves. I complimented her gardening. She smiled that perfect smile and told me beauty was important in a healing environment. Have you ever admired the instrument of your own death because someone told you it was decorative? The first symptoms arrived so gently I mistook them for the natural arithmetic of 73 years. I misplaced my reading glasses on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I could not remember where I had parked at the Scottsdale Quarter. Small erosions, tiny gaps in the architecture of my mind that I filled with excuses, the heat, the altitude, the stress of running 14 facilities. But my hands were the first honest witnesses. By the second week of May, they began to tremble during board meetings. A fine vibration, barely visible, that made my signature on quarterly reports look like it belonged to a woman 20 years my senior. I held them under the conference table and willed them still, refusing to accept that my body was speaking a language my pride could not yet translate. Derek noticed. Of course he noticed. But instead of concern, he offered a diagnosis delivered with the casual authority of a man who had never earned a medical degree. "It is just executive stress. Mom, you have been running this company for decades. Let Vanessa's tea do its work. You will feel better soon." I wanted to believe him. What mother does not want to believe her only child when he tells her everything is fine? So I drank the tea. Every afternoon. 4 o'clock. Chamomile, and honey, and something bitter I could not name. And every afternoon as the cup emptied and the foxglove swayed outside my window, the woman I used to be grew a little smaller, a little dimmer, a little closer to the grave my own family was digging with a porcelain spoon. By the end of that first week, I had forgotten my reading glasses 3 times, misplaced my car keys twice, and woken once in the middle of the night with my heart hammering so wildly against my ribs that I thought the desert itself was trying to shake me from its surface. I blamed the Arizona heat. I should have blamed the woman who kissed my cheek every evening and asked if I had finished every last drop. Poison is patient. It does not announce its arrival with a trumpet blast. It tiptoes through your veins like a guest who knows exactly where the silverware is kept, rearranging you from the inside until the woman in the mirror becomes a stranger wearing your skin. June arrived wrapped in 112-degree heat, and with it came the acceleration. The trembling in my hands spread to my vision. I sat in a board meeting at our Phoenix headquarters on a Tuesday morning, the quarterly projections glowing on the screen before me, and watched the numbers dissolve into gray smudges. The spreadsheet that I had built cell by cell over 4 decades became a foreign language. I blinked. I rubbed my eyes. The fluorescent lights above seemed to pulse with a rhythm that matched the irregular hammering behind my sternum. "Mrs. Holloway, are you all right?" My CFO leaned forward, his face creased with professional concern. "You have been staring at page 3 for 6 minutes. I am fine. Just the heat." I heard my own voice and barely recognized it, thin, reedy, like wind whistling through a cracked window. I shuffled the papers with hands that betrayed me, sending a sheet sliding off the conference table. As I bent to retrieve it, the room tilted 45 degrees to the left and stayed there. I gripped the table edge and waited for the world to right itself, smiling through clenched teeth until gravity remembered its job. That night, I stood in my bathroom, staring at my reflection. The woman who stared back had hollowed cheeks and bruised crescents beneath her eyes. Her skin had taken on a yellowish pallor that no amount of Arizona sun could explain. I touched the glass and felt the cold truth pressing back against my fingertips. I was disappearing. Slowly. Methodically. One teacup at a time. Have you ever watched yourself erode and convinced yourself it was simply the cost of getting older? That is the cruelest trick age plays. It gives your killers the perfect alibi. By mid-June, Vanessa's tea had become sweeter, thicker. The bitter undertone I had noticed in May now lingered on my tongue for hours, coating my mouth with a metallic residue that no amount of water could wash away. But I drank it, every afternoon at 4. Because my son told me it was helping, and because the alternative, suspecting the woman who prepared it, felt like a betrayal of the family I had sacrificed everything to build. Derek arranged a doctor's appointment in late June. I remember feeling grateful that he cared enough to notice my decline. The office was in a medical complex I had never visited, not my regular physician of 15 years, but a specialist Vanessa had found through what she called her wellness network. The man behind the desk wore a white coat and a practiced smile. He checked my vitals with the efficiency of someone following a script rather than a diagnosis. Executive stress, Mrs. Holloway. He wrote something on his pad without making eye contact. Very common in women your age who refuse to delegate. I recommend you step back from daily operations. Let your son handle the heavy lifting, and keep drinking whatever your daughter-in-law is preparing. Holistic approaches are often undervalued. I wanted to argue. 30 years of nursing had taught me that heart arrhythmias and cognitive decline in a 73-year-old did not simply reduce to stress, but the fog, that thick, chemical fog that had settled over my thoughts like cotton, soaked in something sweet, muffled my objections before they could reach my lips. I nodded. I signed the paperwork he placed in front of me without fully reading it. I let Derek drive me home in silence. The falls began in July. The first one happened in my master bathroom. My foot caught on nothing, and suddenly the terracotta tile was rushing toward my face. I caught myself on the vanity, but the impact split the skin above my left eyebrow. Blood dripped into the sink, and I watched it spiral down the drain with a detached fascination that frightened me more than the wound itself. Derek found me pressing a washcloth to my head. His reaction was not alarm. It was impatience, wrapped in a thin veneer of concern. "Mom, this is exactly what the doctor warned about. You are pushing yourself too hard." He did not ask how I fell. He asked if I had signed the updated will his attorney had sent over. Vanessa appeared with gauze and antiseptic, and that ever-present cup. She cleaned my wound with the precision of a former medical professional. Steady hands, clinical focus, no wasted movement. And I remember thinking how lucky Derek was to have married someone so competent. The thought now makes me physically ill. The succession conversation intensified through July. Derek began mentioning October, always October, as though the month itself were a deadline imposed by forces beyond his control. "The audit is in November, Mom. We need clean leadership transition on record before then. It is just optics. You will still be involved, just in an advisory capacity. Is it a sin to hear your child talking about your retirement and miss the sound of him measuring your coffin?" I missed it entirely. The fog was too thick, the tea was too sweet, and my son's voice still sounded enough like love to keep me blind. Then came the phone call. July 23rd, 2:14 in the morning. I had woken gasping from a dream where my heart was a bird trapped in a cage too small for its wings. The arrhythmia was savage that night, beating in a pattern I had not felt since my cardiology rotation 4 decades ago. Begemini, a paired rhythm that meant something was systematically disrupting my heart's electrical system. I padded barefoot to the kitchen for water. The tile was cold beneath my feet, the house silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and a sound that stopped me in the hallway. Derek's voice, low and urgent, drifting from his study. She is getting weaker every week. The signing should be ready by October. Just keep the doctor on board and make sure nobody orders an independent blood panel. I stood in that dark hallway, my hand pressed against the wall for balance, my poisoned heart hammering its warning against my ribs. I told myself he was talking about a business deal, perhaps a difficult vendor transition, perhaps an investor with health concerns. My heart, even in its damaged, chemically sabotaged state, knew better. But the mind protects us from truths too large to swallow whole. So I returned to bed, pulled the sheets to my chin, and pretended that the man I raised would never speak of me as though I were an obstacle with an expiration date. The tea was waiting for me at 4 o'clock the next afternoon. I drank every drop. While I was busy mistaking my own murder for the inconvenience of aging, someone in my house was paying attention. Someone whose eyes had been trained by a suffering I knew nothing about, not yet. Rosa Delgado had cleaned my home for 8 years with the invisible efficiency of a woman who understood that the best service was the kind no one noticed. She moved through the rooms like water, present everywhere, remarked upon by no one. But Rosa was not merely cleaning, she was watching. And what she saw in mid-July turned her quiet loyalty into a declaration of war. It happened on a Wednesday. Vanessa and Derek had driven to Sedona for a weekend retreat, one of those luxury wellness escapes that cost more per night than Rosa earned in a month. The house was empty except for me, dozing in my study with a half-finished cup of chamomile growing cold on the side table, and Rosa, who had begun her routine cleaning of the guest wing where Derek and Vanessa stayed during their frequent visits. Rosa would later tell me that she had not been searching for anything. She had simply been changing the linens in the guest room when she noticed the bedside drawer was slightly ajar, unusual for Vanessa, who kept her spaces with military precision. Rosa pushed it closed, but the drawer caught on something. She pulled it open to adjust whatever had snagged, and her fingers brushed against a small amber glass vial wedged behind a box of tissues. The vial had no label, no pharmacy markings, no prescription number, just a small piece of medical tape wrapped around its neck, with a handwritten notation in Vanessa's elegant script. A series of numbers that meant nothing to a casual observer. But Rosa had spent years inside the medical system. She recognized the format instantly. They were dosage measurements, milligrams, graduated increases, dated entries that corresponded precisely with the weeks I had been declining. Beneath the vial, folded into a square no larger than a playing card, was a single sheet of paper. Rosa unfolded it with hands that had already begun to shake. It was a printout from a pharmaceutical database, the chemical properties of cardiac glycosides derived from digitalis purpurea. The foxglove in our garden, the plant Vanessa had insisted on growing because it attracted hummingbirds. Have you ever held the blueprint of someone's murder in your hands and realized the victim was sleeping in the next room? Rosa stood in that guest bedroom with the Arizona sun pouring through the blinds, and she felt the ground open beneath her feet. Not because the discovery was entirely new to her, but because it was terrifyingly familiar. 8 years ago, in a different house, in a different city, Rosa had been the one lying in a bed while someone she trusted measured poison into her meals. The pattern was identical: the slow erosion of health, the dismissive diagnoses, the family member who insisted everything was fine, while the victim dissolved from the inside out. She could not go to me, not yet. I was still wrapped in the fog, still defending my son with the blind devotion of a mother who would rather doubt her own mind than doubt her child. Rosa knew from her own experience that a victim in denial is more dangerous to themselves than the poison. I would have dismissed her. Or worse, I might have told Derek, who would have eliminated her from the house before nightfall. So Rosa did what survivors do. She gathered evidence in silence. She photographed the vial and the paper with her phone. She returned them exactly as she found them, memorizing the angle of the drawer and the position of the tissue box. Then she walked to the kitchen, took my half-finished cup of chamomile from the study, and poured a small amount into a clean glass jar she had brought from home hidden inside her purse for exactly this purpose. She had been suspicious since June, when she first noticed the way Vanessa watched me drink. The vial was not a discovery. It was a confirmation. The next morning, Rosa drove 40 minutes across Scottsdale to a quiet residential street in Paradise Valley. She parked outside a modest adobe home with a garden full of desert marigolds and rang the bell. The man who answered was Dr. Henry Nakamura, 71 years old, retired professor of pharmacology at the University of Arizona. 3 years earlier, he had spent 4 months as a resident in Holloway Senior Living Facility No. 7 after a stroke left him temporarily unable to care for himself. I had waived his fees entirely, a decision I made, because he reminded me of my late husband Arthur, and because I believed no educator should face bankruptcy for the crime of growing old. Dr. Nakamura remembered that kindness. He remembered it with the precision of a scientist and the gratitude of a man whose dignity had been preserved when the world was ready to strip it away. Rosa placed the glass jar on his kitchen table. The amber liquid caught the morning light, looking deceptively innocent. She told him everything: the trembling, the fog, the foxglove, the vial, the graduated dosages. Dr. Nakamura listened without interruption, his silver eyebrows drawing together in a expression Rosa recognized as controlled horror. He took the sample to his home laboratory, a small but well-equipped space he maintained for consultations with former colleagues. The analysis took 48 hours. When he called Rosa back, his voice carried the weight of a man delivering a terminal diagnosis. Rosa. His tone was clipped, clinical, the way scientists speak when emotion would be an indulgence they cannot afford. This is digitalis, foxglove extract, purified and concentrated well beyond anything found in commercial herbal preparations. At the level present in this sample, administered daily over several months, it would produce progressive cardiac arrhythmia, cognitive deterioration, visual disturbances, and eventually, he paused, fatal heart failure. If she has been drinking this since May, her heart is already significantly compromised. Rosa gripped the phone so hard her knuckles turned white. The kitchen counter pressed cold against her hip as the weight of confirmation settled into her bones. She had known. Somewhere beneath the hope that she was wrong, she had known since June. "How long does she have?" Rosa whispered. "At this concentration, weeks. Perhaps less, if the dosage increases." The silence that followed was not empty. It was the silence of a decision being forged in fire. Rosa looked at the kitchen where Vanessa would prepare tomorrow's tea. She looked at the hallway leading to my study, where I slept in ignorant peace. She thought of a hospital bed 8 years ago, and a woman who believed her when no one else would. Rosa had 2 choices. She could run, protect herself and her daughter, disappear before Vanessa discovered what she knew. Or she could fight for the woman who once fought for her. She chose war. Quiet, methodical, invisible war. From that day forward, Rosa began intercepting my tea whenever possible. She developed a system volunteering to bring the cup from the kitchen to my study, then stopping in the laundry room to pour out half the contents and refill with plain hot water. She could not eliminate the poison entirely without alerting Vanessa to the interference. But she could dilute it. She could buy me time. She could keep my heart beating just long enough for the truth to outrun the lies. Why would a 62-year-old housekeeper risk everything: her safety, her daughter's career, her own life to save a woman who paid her $14 an hour to polish silver and fold linens? The answer is not money. It is not duty. It is a debt that lives in the marrow, placed there by a kindness so profound it rewrites the architecture of a life. To understand Rosa's war, you must first understand her wound. 2017. 8 years before she stood in my kitchen diluting poison with trembling hands, Rosa Delgado was lying in a hospital bed at Holloway Senior Living Community No. 3 in Mesa, Arizona. She was 54 years old. Her body weighed 91 pounds. Her blood contained enough zolpidem, a prescription sleeping medication, to have killed a woman half her age. And the person responsible for putting it there was her only son, Miguel. Rosa had raised Miguel alone after her husband's death in 1998. She worked 3 cleaning jobs simultaneously, saving every spare dollar for his education. He graduated from Arizona State with a business degree she had purchased with 20 years of calloused hands and missed meals. When Rosa retired at 52, with a modest pension and a small house in Tempe, she believed her sacrifice had purchased something sacred, a son who would protect her the way she had protected him. Instead, Miguel saw a balance sheet. Her pension, her house, her life insurance. A mother whose slow disappearance would look like nothing more than the natural erosion of a lonely widow. He began with sleeping pills crushed into her evening coffee, just enough to keep her disoriented, confused, unable to manage her own finances. Within 3 months, he had power of attorney. Within 5, he had drained her savings, refinanced her home, and reduced the woman who gave him life to a skeleton who could not remember her own middle name. Have you ever been erased by the person you built your entire world around? Rosa had. And the system that was supposed to protect her failed at every checkpoint. Her regular doctor attributed the weight loss and confusion to depression. Her neighbors noticed she had stopped attending Sunday Mass, but assumed she was simply aging. Miguel visited weekly just often enough to maintain the fiction of a devoted son. He brought flowers. He smiled at the nurses. He signed documents she could no longer read. Rosa ended up at Holloway No. 3 not through any intervention of justice, but because Miguel finally needed her somewhere visible. A facility where her decline could be observed and documented as natural, paving the way for a clean inheritance. He chose my facility because it was the most prestigious in the region. The irony would not become apparent for years. I met Rosa on a routine walkthrough in September of 2017. I was 65 then, still conducting personal inspections of all 14 facilities at least twice monthly. I noticed her immediately, not because she was remarkable in any medical sense, but because her eyes did not match her chart. The chart described a woman in cognitive decline, resigned to her condition. But Rosa's eyes, dark, liquid, desperate, were the eyes of a prisoner who still remembered freedom. I sat beside her bed uninvited. I took her hand without asking permission. And I said something that I had learned in 30 years of nursing to be the most powerful medicine in existence. Tell me what is really happening. She looked at me with the terror of a woman who had been told that speaking would make everything worse. But something in my face, perhaps the fact that I was a stranger with no stake in Miguel's fiction, broke the dam. She told me everything. The coffee, the pills, the documents she could not remember signing. The son who kissed her forehead while measuring her disappearance by the teaspoon. I believed her. That is the part that mattered. In a world where everyone had chosen the comfortable lie, the doctor, the neighbors, the legal system, I chose the inconvenient truth. I believed a frail woman in a hospital gown over a well-dressed man with a business degree and a practiced smile. Within 48 hours, I had Rosa transferred to a private suite and engaged my personal attorney, Elias Cortez, to investigate. Within 2 weeks, the blood work confirmed chronic zolpidem exposure. Within a month, the financial records revealed a systematic liquidation of Rosa's assets, every penny she had spent 2 decades earning, gone into Miguel's personal accounts. The trial was swift. Miguel's attorney attempted the same defense. I would later hear echoed in my own courtroom. His mother was confused, aging, unreliable. But the blood work did not lie. The bank records did not lie. And I stood in that witness box and told the judge exactly what 30 years of nursing had taught me, that this woman was not declining naturally. She was being dismantled by design. Miguel received 7 years. Rosa received her house back, her pension restored, and something far more valuable, the knowledge that one person in this world had looked at her and seen the truth instead of the lie. She was discharged from Holloway No. 3 on a Thursday morning in January 2018. I expected her to disappear into the quiet retirement she deserved. Instead, she appeared at my front door in Scottsdale 3 weeks later, wearing a simple navy dress and holding a printed resume. Mrs. Holloway, she said, her spine straight as ironwood. I cannot repay what you did for me, but I can make sure no one ever does to you what was done to me. Let me work in your home. Let me watch over you the way you watched over me. I wanted to refuse. She had earned her rest. But the look in her eyes was not the look of a woman requesting employment. It was the look of a sentinel requesting a post. I understood then that Rosa was not offering her labor. She was offering her vigilance. Her gratitude had transformed into a sacred duty that no paycheck could contain. I gave her the job. And for 8 years, Rosa Delgado moved through my home with the quiet focus of a woman waiting for a threat she prayed would never arrive. In 2025, it arrived. And Rosa was ready. 8 years later, standing in the exact same kitchen, watching the exact same crime unfold on a different woman, Rosa felt the full weight of history's cruel repetition. But this time, she was not the victim shackled to a bed by chemistry and silence. This time, she was the weapon. Forged by suffering, sharpened by gratitude, and aimed with the precision of a woman who knew exactly how this story ended if no one intervened. Kindness is not a transaction. It is a seed planted in soil you may never see again. But roots have memory. And sometimes, if you are fortunate enough to survive long enough, those roots grow back toward you in your darkest hour and hold you above the earth when everything else is dragging you under. A predator always knows when it is being watched. The instinct is primal, a shift in the air, a glance held 1 second too long, the faint chemical trace of fear emanating from someone who knows too much. Vanessa Holloway had spent her entire adult life perfecting the art of surveillance. It was inevitable that she would eventually sense the counter-surveillance aimed at her. It happened on an August afternoon, 3 weeks after Rosa had delivered the tea sample to Dr. Nakamura. Rosa had grown bolder, perhaps too bold. She had begun timing her errands to coincide with Vanessa's preparations in the kitchen, finding excuses to linger near the counter where the chamomile was brewed. She wiped surfaces that were already clean. She reorganized spice racks that needed no reorganization. And on this particular afternoon, she made the mistake of glancing too quickly at the amber vial Vanessa had left momentarily exposed on the granite countertop. Their eyes met across the kitchen island. The moment lasted perhaps 2 seconds, but in those 2 seconds, Rosa saw something shift behind Vanessa's hazel. Iris' a cold recalculation, like a chess player who has suddenly noticed an opponent's piece has moved without her seeing. Vanessa said nothing then. She simply smiled that mechanical smile of hers and slid the vial back into her cardigan pocket with the casual ease of a woman pocketing a tube of lipstick. But Rosa felt the temperature in the kitchen drop 10 degrees. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to grow louder, filling the silence with a mechanical drone that matched the sound of danger. Have you ever been in the same room as someone who has decided you need to disappear? The air itself changes composition. It becomes thinner, harder to breathe, as though the oxygen is already being rationed for a future in which you no longer exist. The confrontation came 3 days later. August 29th. Rosa was in the laundry room, a windowless space in the back of the house, where the industrial-sized machines hummed at a frequency that swallowed sound. She was folding sheets when the door clicked shut behind her. The lock engaged with a soft metallic sound that Rosa felt in her spine like a needle. Vanessa stood against the door, her arms crossed, her posture relaxed in a way that communicated absolute control. The fluorescent light above cast her features in a clinical blue-white glare that stripped away every trace of the warm daughter-in-law facade. What remained was something angular, predatory, ancient in its hunger. You have been very busy, Rosa. Vanessa's voice was low, conversational. The voice of a woman, discussing a minor household matter. I noticed you have been spending time near Dr. Nakamura's neighborhood. That is quite a long drive for someone who claims she is just running errands. Rosa's hands continued folding. Muscle memory was the only thing keeping her upright as her blood turned to ice water. She kept her eyes down, her posture small, her breathing controlled. 8 years of domestic invisibility had taught her the language of submission. And right now, submission was the only thing between her and oblivion. I do not know what you are talking about, Mrs. Holloway. I was visiting a friend. Vanessa pushed off the door and walked forward. Her heels clicked against the tile with the measured rhythm of a metronome counting down to 0. She stopped close enough that Rosa could smell her perfume, expensive, mint-laced, sharp enough to cut glass. A scent that Rosa would forever associate with the sensation of prey being cornered. Let me be very clear with you. Vanessa reached out and took Rosa's wrist. Not a grab, a grip. Precise. Clinical. The fingers of a former pharmacist who knew exactly where the tendons were most vulnerable. Her thumb pressed into the soft underside of Rosa's wrist until the older woman's fingers went numb. You are a 62-year-old cleaning lady. You live alone. Your daughter Maria, correct? Just started her 2nd year as a registered nurse at Banner Desert Medical Center. A lovely career. It would be such a shame if an anonymous complaint about medication irregularities ended that career before it began. Rosa's throat constricted. Maria, her daughter, the girl whose life had been rebuilt from the rubble of Miguel's destruction, the girl who had watched her mother disappear into a hospital bed and vowed to become a healer, the girl who was now the only family Rosa had left in the world. Derek has very powerful friends on the medical licensing board. Vanessa continued, her grip tightening. One phone call. That is all it takes. One phone call. And Maria is finished. Do you understand what I am telling you? Rosa nodded. She let her shoulders drop. She let her eyes fill with the tears that were already pressing against her lids. Not from submission, but from the volcanic rage she could not yet afford to release. She played the role perfectly. The frightened old woman, the obedient servant, the invisible housekeeper who knew her place. I did not see anything, Mrs. Holloway. Rosa's voice cracked convincingly. I am just doing my job. I do not want any trouble. Vanessa released her wrist. The blood rushed back into Rosa's fingers with a painful tingling that felt like electricity. The younger woman smoothed her blouse, recomposed her features into that familiar mask of pleasantness, and reached for the door handle. Good. Vanessa turned back, one hand on the lock. Because the next time I find you somewhere you do not belong, it will not be Maria's career that ends. It will be something far more permanent. For both of you, the door opened. The hallway light flooded in, and Vanessa walked away, humming, actually humming, a melody that sounded like a lullaby repurposed as a funeral march. Rosa stood alone in the laundry room, surrounded by the mechanical hum of the dryers and the clean chemical scent of fabric softener. Her wrist throbbed where Vanessa's fingers had pressed their thread into her skin. Her hands shook. Her knees threatened to buckle. But inside the deep pocket of her cardigan, nestled against the lining where no casual search would find it, a small digital voice recorder was running. Its red indicator light pulsed like a tiny heartbeat in the darkness of the fabric. Every word Vanessa had spoken, every threat, every syllable of the mask dropping away to reveal the predator beneath. Rosa had entered that laundry room as a housekeeper. She walked out as a witness. She did not stop. She did not slow down. Over the following weeks, Rosa refined her system with the patience of a woman who understood that evidence was the only language the law would accept. She photographed Vanessa's garden close-ups of the foxglove, the pruning shears left beside the plants, the collection trays where leaves were dried on the windowsill of the guest bathroom. She documented the timing of each tea service in a small spiral notebook hidden inside her Bible. She recorded 2 more conversations, fragments, whispered exchanges between Derek and Vanessa about dosages and timelines that they assumed were private. The hunted had become the hunter, and the hunter was patient. Because Rosa knew from the deepest scar of her own survival that the moment you strike too early is the moment you lose everything. There is a moment in every poisoning, a single instant, where the chemistry of murder collides with the biology of survival, and the body screams loud enough to override the mind's desperate need to believe the lie. For me, that moment arrived at 3:17 in the morning on September 4th, 2025. I woke gasping, Not the gradual surfacing of an old woman disturbed by a dream, but the violent eruption of a body that has recognized its own execution in progress. My chest felt like something had reached inside and grabbed my heart with an iron fist, squeezing it in a rhythm that was wrong, fundamentally, terrifyingly wrong. I pressed my fingers to my carotid artery with the automatic precision of a nurse who had taken 10,000 pulses in her career. What I felt made me freeze. Bigemony. A paired rhythm. Beat, pause. Beat, beat, pause. Beat where every normal contraction was followed by an abnormal one. I had not felt this pattern since my cardiology rotation at Tucson Medical Center in 1983. I knew what caused it. I knew it the way you know your own name in the dark. Digitalis. Cardiac glycoside toxicity. The textbook I had memorized 4 decades ago opened in my mind like a vault, and every symptom I had dismissed for 4 months rearranged itself into a clinical portrait so clear it burned. The trembling hands, the visual disturbances, the nausea that came in waves after every afternoon tea, the yellow-tinged halos around lights that I had attributed to aging cataracts, the confusion, the memory loss, the profound fatigue. Every single symptom aligned with digitalis poisoning. A diagnosis I should have recognized months ago if the drug itself had not been systematically clouding the very cognition I needed to identify it. Have you ever woken up inside your own coffin and realized the people who nailed it shut were the ones you trusted to keep you safe? I sat on the edge of my bed, my bare feet touching the cool terracotta, and felt the fog, that thick, sweet, suffocating fog that had owned my mind since May, begin to thin. Not because the poison had stopped. Rosa's dilution was the only reason I was alive to have this revelation, but because the sheer biochemical shock of the arrhythmia had flooded my system with enough adrenaline to temporarily override the cognitive suppression. I was awake. For the first time in 4 months, I was truly, completely, devastatingly awake. The foxglove, the purple bells swaying in the garden that Vanessa tended with such care. Digitalis purpurea. The plant named for the very compound that was systematically dismantling my heart's electrical system. She had planted the murder weapon in my own garden and told me it attracted hummingbirds. I stood on legs that trembled not from weakness but from the seismic shift happening inside my skull. The woman who had built a $42 million empire from a nurse's salary was finally applying her diagnostic skills to the one patient she had neglected herself. At 6:45 that morning, I found Rosa in the kitchen. She was standing at the counter, her back to me, pouring hot water into a teapot with the measured movements of a woman who had been fighting a secret war. I watched her pour out half the chamomile Vanessa had prepared the night before and replace it with plain filtered water. She did it so smoothly, so practiced, that the motion looked like nothing more than routine preparation. Rosa. She turned. The teapot nearly slipped from her hands. Her eyes dark, exhausted, carrying the weight of weeks of solitary combat, met mine and widened. She saw something different in my face, something she had been waiting months to see. "You know," she whispered. It was not a question. I know. The silence that followed was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of 2 women recognizing each other across a battlefield they had both been fighting alone. Rosa set down the teapot. Her hands were shaking not with fear this time, but with the overwhelming release of a burden carried too long in isolation. We moved to the far corner of the laundry room, the same room where Vanessa had cornered Rosa weeks earlier. Rosa pulled the door closed and turned on both dryers. The mechanical hum swallowed our voices, creating a cocoon of white noise where truth could finally be spoken aloud. She told me everything. The vial in Vanessa's drawer, the dosage chart, Dr. Nakamura's laboratory analysis, confirming concentrated digitalis. The confrontation in this very room, Vanessa's grip on her wrist, the threats against Maria, the cold promise of permanent silence. She pulled out her phone and played the recording. Vanessa's voice filled the space between us, clinical, predatory, utterly without remorse. Then Rosa opened her spiral notebook. Pages and pages of dated entries every time she had managed to dilute my tea, Every conversation she had overheard between Derek and Vanessa about timelines and dosages, every photograph of the foxglove garden and the drying trays in the guest bathroom, 4 months of evidence, collected by a woman who cleaned floors for a living and fought wars in the spaces between. I sat on the dryer lid, the vibration traveling through my body like a second heartbeat, and processed the clinical reality. My daughter-in-law was poisoning me with extracted digitalis. My son was complicit, at minimum aware. Possibly the architect. My heart was already compromised. And the only reason I was still breathing was a 62-year-old housekeeper who had been systematically reducing my daily dose of death for weeks. Mrs. Holloway. Rosa gripped my hand. Her fingers were calloused and warm and absolutely unwavering. What do we do? I looked at her. Then I looked through the laundry room wall toward the kitchen, where Vanessa would arrive in 2 hours to prepare my next cup. The fog was gone. In its place was something cold, sharp, and absolutely lethal clarity. We do not run, I said. We do not confront, we collect, and they will never see me coming because they still think I am already dead. Rosa's eyes hardened into steel. She nodded once, a soldier receiving orders she had been waiting months to hear. We spent the next hour building our strategy. I would continue to appear weak, shakier than I truly was, more confused, more dependent on Vanessa's care. Every tremor would be theater. Every forgotten word would be bait. I would give them the dying woman they expected, while I dismantled their operation from the inside. The dryers hummed their approval. The war had a general now, and the general had 30 years of nursing, $42 million in resources, and absolutely nothing left to lose. In real estate, I learned that the most valuable asset is not the land or the building. It is information. The person who knows the truth about a property's foundation holds all the power regardless of whose name is on the deed. I had spent 4 decades acquiring properties by understanding their hidden weaknesses before the sellers did. Now, I would apply that same principle to the house I was being murdered in. September 12th. I contacted Sentinel Security Solutions, a firm I had used years ago to install monitoring systems across my senior living facilities. I called from a burner phone Rosa had purchased at a gas station in Tempe, using cash from a personal safe. Vanessa did not know existed. The cover story was simple and airtight. I told them I was upgrading my home's smart security system, cameras, sensors, the full package. A wealthy 73-year-old woman concerned about break-ins in the Scottsdale area. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would raise a question if Derek somehow discovered the invoice. The installation date was set for September 14th, a Saturday evening. I knew with certainty that Derek and Vanessa would be attending the Scottsdale Arts Gala that night. Vanessa had been talking about her dress for weeks, a floor-length emerald number that cost more than Rosa's annual salary. They would be gone from 7 until well past midnight. Do you know what it costs to turn your own home into a surveillance vault? $11,400. That is the price of witnessing your own murder in high definition. I paid it without hesitation. It was the best investment I had ever made. The team arrived at 7:15, 4 men in unmarked vehicles who moved through my house with the efficiency of ghosts. Rosa met them at the service entrance and guided them through the rooms, pointing out the critical zones. The kitchen island where Vanessa prepared the tea. The study where Derek made his phone calls. The guest bedroom where the vial was kept. The garden window overlooking the foxglove bed. They installed pinhole cameras so small they disappeared into the grain of the woodwork embedded in crown moldings, concealed behind decorative tiles, hidden within the ventilation grates. Audio sensors threaded through the walls like veins carrying the lifeblood of truth to a central encrypted server concealed inside a false panel in my bedroom closet. The entire system fed to a secure cloud server and simultaneously to a tablet I kept locked in my personal safe. I watched them work from my armchair, a cup of plain water in my hand. Rosa had switched my evening tea hours ago, feeling the strange dual sensation of violation and empowerment. My home was being wired for sound and vision by strangers because the people who were supposed to love me had turned it into a kill room. By 9:45, the installation was complete. The team leader, a former military intelligence operative named Garrett, handed me the tablet with the live feeds already active. 12 angles, full audio, night vision capable. He looked at me with the professional neutrality of a man who had seen enough domestic horror to stop asking questions. Full coverage, Mrs. Holloway. High definition, audio included. Your family will never know these exist. I nodded. The weight of the tablet in my hands felt like the weight of a loaded weapon. Because that is exactly what it was. The first footage arrived that same night. Derek and Vanessa returned from the gala at 12:40. Tipsy on champagne and whatever delusion fueled their confidence. I lay in my bed with the tablet propped on my pillow. The brightness dimmed to a ghostly minimum. Watching my son and his wife move through the kitchen in real time. They did not know that every whisper, every gesture, every casual confession was now being recorded in crystalline clarity. But the footage that mattered, the footage that would ultimately send them both to prison, accumulated over the following 3 weeks. I watched it each night after Rosa confirmed they were asleep, consuming the evidence of my own attempted murder, like a patient reading her own autopsy report. Week 1. September 16th, 5:47 in the morning. Camera 3. The garden angle. Vanessa, still in her silk robe, kneeling beside the foxglove bed with a pair of kitchen scissors. The dawn light caught her hands as she selected specific leaves. Mature, deeply veined, rich with concentrated glycosides. She placed them in a ceramic bowl with the methodical care of a pharmacist preparing a prescription. I watched her carry the bowl back inside, where camera 7 the kitchen captured her crushing the leaves with a mortar and pestle, straining the extract through cheesecloth, and adding the concentrated liquid to my chamomile tin. Her face was serene, bored even, the face of a woman performing a household chore no more remarkable than watering the succulents. Week 2. September 21st, 2:15 in the afternoon. Camera 5, the study. Derek seated at my desk speaking with a man I recognized as the doctor who had diagnosed me with executive stress. The footage showed Derek handing the man an envelope. The man counted its contents without pretending to be subtle cash, thick enough to strain the paper. Their conversation was brief. Keep the diagnosis consistent. If anyone asks, she is declining, naturally. Do not order blood work. Derek nodded. The man left through the side entrance. My son had purchased my death certificate in advance with cash he had stolen from my own company. Week 3. September 28th, 11:43 at night. Camera 2, the living room. Derek and Vanessa on the sofa, sharing a bottle of wine that cost $400. The audio was pristine. Every syllable preserved. Once she signs, the insurance kicks in within 90 days. Derek swirled his glass. After that, nature takes its course. We just need her lucid enough to hold a pen on October 15th. Vanessa smiled. She leaned her head against his shoulder in a grotesque pantomime of marital intimacy. And if she cannot hold the pen, then we guide her hand. Derek's voice carried no hesitation, no remorse. The tone of a man discussing quarterly projections, not matricide. Then came the moment that broke something inside me beyond repair. Derek set down his glass, raised both hands in front of his face, and began to shake them, mimicking the tremor that had plagued me for months. He contorted his features into a mask of confusion, letting his jaw hang slack, his eyes rolling. Look at her hands shake, Vanessa. He slurred in a mocking falsetto. Just like a little bird dying in a cage. Vanessa laughed. Not a polite chuckle. A full-throated, delighted laugh that echoed through my living room and straight into the microphone hidden 3 feet above their heads. I sat in my bed watching the screen, and I did not cry. The woman who would have cried for her son had died somewhere in the fog of June. The woman who remained was made of something harder Arizona limestone, and 30 years of watching people die with more dignity than my own child would ever possess. I watched my son mock my death on a screen the size of a dinner plate, and I felt nothing but the cold surgical satisfaction of a woman who now had every weapon she needed to end this war. Murder is expensive, not just in its execution, but in the desperation that drives a man to choose it over confession. I already knew my son was willing to watch me die. What I did not yet know was why until the numbers told me a story uglier than the poison itself. October 2nd. I contacted Patricia Vega, a forensic accountant I had used a decade earlier when a former CFO was suspected of skimming from our employee pension fund. Patricia was a small woman with wire-rimmed glasses and an expression of permanent professional displeasure, as though the numbers she examined personally offended her with their dishonesty. She operated from a windowless office in downtown Phoenix, surrounded by filing cabinets that contained the financial autopsies of 100 broken companies. I arrived at her office in a hat and sunglasses, a costume of secrecy that made me feel absurd, until I remembered that the man I was investigating shared my last name and my blood. I handed Patricia a flash drive containing 18 months of Holloway Senior Living financial records that I had downloaded from the company server on a night when Derek believed I was too confused to remember my own password. "I need you to follow the money," I told her. "All of it. Wherever it leads." Patricia took the drive with the dispassionate efficiency of a surgeon receiving a biopsy. She told me to return in 72 hours. I drove home with the desert sun burning through my windshield and the knowledge that whatever she found would be worse than what I already knew. It always is. Have you ever paid someone to confirm that your own child has been robbing you? The check felt like writing my own ransom note. 3 days later, I sat across from Patricia as she spread a series of printed spreadsheets across her desk. The paper rustled with the dry authority of documents that carry no emotion, only truth. She had traced the financial hemorrhage with the meticulous patience of a bloodhound following a scent through a labyrinth. The damage was surgical. $1.4 million had been siphoned from Holloway Senior Living's operational accounts over the past 8 months. Derek had been authorizing wire transfers to 3 shell companies' entities with names like Oasis Wellness Group and Desert Bloom Ventures that existed only on paper. The money flowed from those shells into a single destination, a chain of luxury spa facilities in Tempe and Cave Creek that Derek had secretly invested in under Vanessa's maiden name. The spas were hemorrhaging cash. Every single one was operating at a loss. The flagship location in Tempe had been shut down by the health department in July for code violations. The same month, Derek began pushing hardest for my retirement. He was not building an empire. He was burying evidence of a catastrophic failure beneath my company's balance sheet. "Mrs. Holloway," Patricia said, sliding a particularly dense spreadsheet toward me, "your son did not just mismanage funds. He executed a systematic liquidation of your operational reserves. If this continues unchecked for another 60 days, 3 of your 14 facilities will be unable to meet payroll. 3 facilities, hundreds of employees, thousands of elderly residents depending on the care I had spent my life building." Derek was not just killing me. He was hollowing out the very thing I lived for, and he needed me dead or incapacitated before the November audit exposed the void. But the financial bleeding was only the first layer. Patricia pulled a second file from her desk, this one thinner, but heavier in its implications. She had traced an unusual payment from Derek's personal account to Pacific Mutual Life Insurance, a premium change processed 6 months earlier. My life insurance policy, which I had maintained at $2 million for over a decade, had been quietly increased to $6 million. The beneficiary had been changed from a charitable trust to Derek Holloway, sole recipient. The signature on the modification form was mine, except it was not. Patricia had compared it to 20 years of my authenticated signatures and found 3 microscopic inconsistencies in the letter formation that indicated a skilled but imperfect forgery. "He forged my signature," I said. The words came out flat. Clinical. I had moved past shock into a territory where each new betrayal was simply another data point on a graph of depravity. "That is not all." Patricia reached into a manila folder and withdrew a single document that made my stomach lurch. It was a pre-arrangement agreement with Eternal Rest Cremation Services in North Phoenix, dated August 15th, 2 months before the planned signing ceremony. It specified immediate cremation with no autopsy, no embalming, no viewing. The authorized contact was Derek Holloway. The payment had already been processed. My son had pre-ordered my cremation before I was even dead. He had paid for my ashes to be scattered before anyone could test my blood for the poison that was systematically destroying my kidneys. The document sat on Patricia's desk like a headstone, my name already engraved, the date left conveniently blank. I stared at the cremation order. The fluorescent light above hummed with the same frequency as the machines in my laundry room, the machines that had covered the sound of Rosa and me planning our war. I felt the irony settle into my chest like a stone. My son was so confident in my decline that he had already arranged for the destruction of evidence. He believed I was too foggy to notice, too weak to fight, and too dead or close enough to object. The audit, I said. November 1st. That is his deadline. Patricia nodded. If the board's external auditors discover the deficit before Derek has control of the company, he faces criminal charges for embezzlement. He needs you either deceased or legally declared incompetent before that date. Your death triggers the insurance payout $6 million, which he would use to refill the accounts before the auditors arrive. The math of my murder was elegant in its cruelty. Kill the mother. Collect $6 million. Plug the hole. Survive the audit. Inherit the empire. All wrapped in the convenient narrative of a 73-year-old woman whose heart simply gave out under the stress of running a company too long. I gathered the documents, the shell company records, the forged insurance modification, the cremation pre-arrangement, and placed them in my briefcase with hands that did not tremble. Not because the digitalis had stopped, but because rage is a more powerful stabilizer than any medication ever synthesized. My son did not just want me dead. He wanted me erased. Burned to ash before anyone could read the story written in my bones. But the story was already written elsewhere in Patricia's spreadsheets, in Rosa's notebook, in 12 cameras recording every move he made. And stories, unlike bodies, cannot be cremated. I thought I knew the shape of my enemy. I thought Vanessa was a greedy daughter-in-law who had married my son for access to my empire and decided that patience was too expensive a virtue. I was wrong. The truth was so much worse that when Detective Camille Weston laid it before me, I felt the ground beneath my chair dissolve into nothing. October 8th. I drove to the Scottsdale Police Department with a briefcase containing Patricia's financial documents, Rosa's spiral notebook, a copy of Dr. Nakamura's lab analysis, and an encrypted flash drive holding 3 weeks of surveillance footage. I had called ahead not to the general desk, but to the Elder Abuse Division specifically. The officer who took my call connected me with Detective Weston, a 47-year-old investigator whose entire career had been built around the specific intersection of wealth, family, and predation against the elderly. Weston met me in a private conference room that smelled of stale coffee and recycled air. She was a compact woman with close-cropped silver hair and eyes that moved with the efficient scanning pattern of someone trained to read the architecture of lies. She listened to my account for 45 minutes without interruption, absorbing the timeline, the symptoms, the footage, the financials, while her pen scratched shorthand notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she did not offer sympathy. She offered something far more valuable. She offered recognition. "Mrs. Holloway," she said, leaning forward with her forearms flat on the metal table. "I need to show you something, and I need you to prepare yourself. Because what I am about to tell you changes the scope of this investigation from domestic to federal." She opened her laptop and turned the screen toward me. The screen filled with a photograph I recognized instantly, Vanessa. Perhaps 4 years younger, standing beside an elderly man at what appeared to be a country club in Scottsdale. But the name beneath the photograph was not Vanessa Holloway. It was not even Vanessa Palmer, the name she had used when Derek met her. It was Vanessa Crane. Have you ever discovered that the person sleeping under your roof has a body count? Weston spoke with the measured precision of a detective who had spent months building a case that kept hitting dead ends. Vanessa Crane was a licensed pharmacist in the state of Nevada from 2012 through 2019. Her license was revoked following two separate incidents at two different hospitals in Las Vegas and Henderson. Incidents classified as medication errors, resulting in patient death. In both cases, the deceased were elderly men. Wealthy, connected, and both died of cardiac failure consistent with glycoside toxicity. The first was a retired mining executive named Harold Fenton, 78 years old. He died in March 2017 at Sunrise Hospital in Las Vegas. His attending physician attributed the death to natural cardiac arrest, advanced age, pre-existing conditions. No autopsy was performed. His estate, valued at $4.2 million, passed to his son, a man Vanessa had been dating at the time. The second was a casino developer named George Radcliffe, 81 years old. He died in November 2019 at Street Rose Dominican in Henderson. Same diagnosis, same lack of autopsy, same outcome the estate passed through the family. And Vanessa had been intimately connected to the son for the preceding 14 months. Weston tapped the screen. In both cases, she accessed the victims through their adult children. She identified men with financial vulnerabilities, gambling debts, failed investments, tax problems, and positioned herself as the solution. The sons became her keys to the front door. Once inside, she used her pharmaceutical training to administer cardiac glycosides through food or beverages. Slow, methodical, virtually undetectable without specific testing. I felt a numbness spreading through my limbs. The detective's voice became distant, as though she were speaking from behind glass. The woman I had allowed into my kitchen, the woman who kissed my cheek and called me Maggie dear, had killed before. Multiple times. With the same method. The same patience. The same smile. There is one more thing. Weston reached into a manila folder and withdrew a photocopy of a handwritten page. This was recovered from a storage unit, registered under an alias in Reno, Nevada. The FBI has been tracking Crane for 2 years, but we have never had enough for an arrest. Until now. She slid the paper toward me. It was a list. 5 names written in Vanessa's elegant, looping script. The same handwriting I recognized from birthday cards and grocery lists left on my refrigerator. The first name on the list had been crossed out with a single clean line. Harold Fenton. The second also crossed. George Radcliffe. The third name was mine. Margaret Holloway. Uncrossed. Still active. Still in progress. But it was the fourth name that stopped my heart in a way no amount of digitalis ever could. Derek Holloway. Beside it, written in parentheses, was a date, December 2025. 2 months from now. I stared at the paper until the letters blurred. My daughter-in-law was not merely poisoning me to help my son inherit wealth. She was a serial predator who moved from family to family, extracting value through the bodies of elderly men and occasionally the sons who had served as her points of entry. Derek was not her partner. He was her next victim. The woman my son had chosen over his own mother was already sharpening the blade for his throat. And he had no idea. He had climbed into bed with his own executioner, believing he was her accomplice, never suspecting that their partnership had an expiration date written in ink that matched the names of dead men. Mrs. Holloway. Weston's voice pulled me back. With your surveillance footage and Dr. Nakamura's lab results, we now have enough to establish a federal pattern. But I need your cooperation to build a case that puts her away permanently, not just for your attempted murder, but for all of them. I looked at the list. At my name, sandwiched between dead men and my living son. The fury I felt was not just for myself. It was for Harold Fenton, who deserved an autopsy. For George Radcliffe, whose heart failure was anything but natural. And yes, God help me, it was even for Derek. Because despite everything he had done, he was still my son. And no mother, however betrayed, can look at her child's name on a kill list and feel nothing. I will do whatever it takes, I told Weston. My voice did not waver. Tell me what you need. She did not smile. Detectives who deal in elder murder do not smile at cooperation. They nod. And Weston's nod carried the weight of 2 years of frustrated investigation, finally finding its keystone. "We are going to set a trap, Mrs. Holloway, and your daughter-in-law is going to walk right into it." The fluorescent lights of Honor Health Scottsdale hummed above me like a mechanical choir singing a hymn to sterile truth. I sat in a plastic waiting room chair, the clinical brightness feeling like a baptism after 5 months of chemical fog. The air smelled of industrial antiseptic and recycled grief, the universal perfume of places where families learn things they cannot unlearn. Vanessa had been stabilized. The emergency physician, Dr. Osei, a young woman with braids pulled tight and eyes that missed nothing, had pumped her stomach and administered activated charcoal within 30 minutes. The digitalis concentration was acute but survivable. Irony is a surgeon that operates without anesthesia. The woman who had been titrating my death for 4 months survived her own poison because medicine moved faster than her cruelty. Dr. Osei approached me in the corridor, clipboard pressed against her chest. "Mrs. Holloway, we ran a comprehensive toxicology panel on you as well." Her voice was low and controlled. "Your blood shows elevated levels of digoxin-like immunoreactive substances. Based on the concentration and your symptom history, you have been ingesting cardiac glycosides for at least 4 months. Your heart shows signs of chronic electrical disruption. You are fortunate to be alive." I nodded. I already knew. But hearing it spoken under hospital lights with a bracelet around my wrist transformed suspicion into courtroom fact. "Have you ever been grateful for a diagnosis that confirms someone has been trying to kill you? It is a feeling beyond grief, a cold plateau where the air is thin and the only direction left is forward." Derek arrived 40 minutes later. He had driven separately, of course he had. He paced the far corridor with his phone pressed to his ear. Expensive shoes clicking linoleum with the agitated rhythm of a man whose spreadsheet was bleeding red. I watched him through the vending machine glass. He was not calling family. He was calling his attorney. When he finally approached, his face wore the mask of concerned son, but the mask no longer fit. It hung loose at the edges, revealing calculation beneath. "Mom, this is a nightmare. How is she?" His voice was performative, pitched for passing nurses rather than for me. I looked at my son, 42 years old, the boy I carried 9 months and nursed through fevers and read to until my voice went hoarse. I searched for any flicker of that child behind those calculating eyes. "Derek, sit down." He sat. I let the silence stretch 10 seconds, 20, until his composure cracked. His knee bounced. His fingers drummed. The body betrays what the mouth will not. "I know about the digitalis." I said it without drama, without the trembling old woman they had spent months creating. "I know about the foxglove. I know Vanessa has been extracting it and putting it in my tea since May." His face went white. Not shock, he already knew. The white of a man who realizes his opponent has been playing a different game entirely. "She told me it was herbal supplements," he stammered. "Something natural for your heart." I did not know. I pulled out my phone and pressed play. His own voice filled the corridor. "Once she signs, the insurance kicks in within 90 days. After that, nature takes its course." His mouth opened and closed. "That was Mom. You do not understand the pressure. The spas failed. The debt. You do not know what it is like to owe people who do not accept excuses. Did you know she was poisoning me, Derek?" The corridor contracted. A nurse passed with a rattling cart medication bottles, providing a grotesque soundtrack to the moment my son chose between truth and survival. I thought it was just something to make the transition easier. I never thought it could. He could not finish. "You knew. You watched me deteriorate for 5 months. You scheduled a cremation. You forged my insurance. You paid a man to keep doctors from my blood. Mom." His voice cracked, and for one heartbeat I heard the boy. The small, frightened boy who crawled into my bed during thunderstorms. "Do not go to the police. Think about the company, the facilities, the residents. We can fix this within the family. I waited. One final moment. One last chance to choose his mother over survival. To say the words I needed, "I am sorry." I was wrong. Instead, he said the words that turned my heart to stone. "I need her, Mom. Without Vanessa, I have nothing. She is the only one who knows how to fix the finances. Just let me handle this. I will make sure she never touches your tea again." Have you ever watched your own child choose your executioner over you? It does not look like a movie. It looks like a man staring at his shoes, calculating which relationship has more financial utility. He chose her. The woman on that hospital bed. The woman methodically stopping his mother's heart. And my son chose her. Not from love, from need. Without her, his house of cards collapsed, and the audit would bury him alive. I stood. The chair scraped linoleum with the sound of a final sentence. I looked down at this stranger, wearing my dead husband's jaw and my own brown eyes. "You had me, Derek. That was supposed to be enough." He did not follow. He sat pulling out his phone, thumb already hovering over Vanessa's attorney's number. I heard him arranging bail before I reached the sliding glass doors. My son drove to county jail that night. He chose the woman killing his mother over the mother who gave him life. I stepped into the October desert air, cold and biting against my wet cheeks. Somewhere inside me, in the deep tectonic place where a mother's love lives like an underground river, the water turned to stone. Not grief. Granite. Permanent. Beyond any prayer or passage of time, the stars above Scottsdale were sharp as needles. I stood in that parking lot and felt something new settle into my spine. Not rage. Not sorrow. Something quieter and infinitely more dangerous. Purpose. 5 days. That is how long it took to transform my grief into a weapon with teeth. 5 days between the night my son chose his executioner over his mother and the morning I chose to end his freedom forever. I spent those days in Detective Weston's office, building the architecture of a trap so elegant that Derek would seal his own fate with the very pen he had been using to forge my death. October 20th. 8:47 in the morning. I sat in the conference room at Holloway Senior Living's Phoenix headquarters, the same building where I had once presided over board meetings with the authority of a woman who had earned every square foot. The room smelled of leather and laser toner and the faint ozone of freshly printed documents. On the table before me sat a stack of papers that looked, at first glance, identical to the succession transfer Derek had been pushing for months. They were not. Weston's legal team had spent 3 days constructing a masterpiece of paper deception. The cover page read, "Transfer of Operational Authority, Holloway Senior Living Communities." The formatting was identical to the documents Derek's own attorney had drafted. The signature lines were in the same positions. The language of the first 2 paragraphs matched his version, word for word. But buried in the dense legal language of page 4 in the section no impatient man ever reads when he believes he is moments away from inheriting $42 million was a detailed confession, a self-dealing disclosure statement that acknowledged unauthorized fund transfers, fraudulent insurance modifications, conspiracy to conceal medical evidence, and willful participation in the chemical incapacitation of a family member. Derek's signature on that document would be his own handwritten admission of guilt. I called him at 8:52. I kept my voice thin, fragile, the voice of the dying woman he expected me to be. "Derek, I have been thinking." I paused for effect, adding a slight tremor. "You are right. I am too old for this. I want to sign the papers. Can you come to the office this morning?" The silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds. The silence of a predator who cannot believe the prey has walked back into the clearing. Then his voice returned, smooth and warm, dripping with the practiced tenderness of a son who smells victory. "Of course, Mom. I will be there in 30 minutes. Just relax. I will bring everything we need." I set the phone down and looked across the table at Detective Weston, who sat behind the frosted glass partition of the adjacent room, with 2 plainclothes officers and a federal agent named Torres from the FBI's Elder Fraud Division. Weston gave me a single nod through the glass. The trap was set. The only variable remaining was whether my son's greed would override his caution. It did. Of course it did. Greed is the only addiction that grows hungrier the closer it gets to satisfaction. Have you ever set a trap for your own child and prayed he would be smart enough not to walk into it? I prayed. For exactly 29 minutes, I prayed that Derek would read the documents, that some flicker of the intelligence I had spent a fortune educating would cause him to pause on page 4, that he would look at me with confusion rather than eagerness, and I would know there was still a man inside that shell worth saving. He arrived at 9:21. He wore his charcoal suit, the one I had bought him for his 40th birthday, and carried a leather portfolio under his arm. His cologne preceded him through the door, sharp and confident. He smiled at me with the warmth of a man who believes he has already won. Mom. He crossed the room and kissed my forehead. The press of his lips against my skin felt like the stamp of a receipt. You are doing the right thing. I gestured toward the documents. My hand trembled. Theater, not toxin. Everything is ready. I just need your signature as accepting party on the operational transfer. Derek did not sit down. He stood over the table, pulled his Mont Blanc pen from his jacket pocket, a pen I had given him for his college graduation, and flipped directly to the signature page. He did not read page 1. He did not glance at page 2. He certainly did not pause at page 4, where his own crimes were enumerated in language precise enough to satisfy a federal judge. He signed with a flourish. The scratch of the nib against paper sounded like the closing of a vault door with him on the inside. Is that everything? He capped his pen. His smile was incandescent. The smile of a man who believed he had just inherited the world. The frosted glass door opened. Derek Holloway. Detective Weston's voice cut through the room like a blade dropped from height. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, financial elder abuse, insurance fraud, and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. The transformation on my son's face was instantaneous, a time-lapse of confidence collapsing into incomprehension, then terror. 2 plainclothes officers materialized behind him. The click of handcuffs, cold steel meeting warm wrist, was the most precise sound I had ever heard. It carried the weight of 5 months of poison, 5 months of diluted tea, 5 months of Rosa's spiral notebook filling page by page in the dark. Mom, what is I did not? He twisted toward me, his eyes wild, searching my face for the frail, confused woman he had been expecting. She was not there. The woman looking back at him was made of Arizona limestone and $42 million of earned authority. You signed your own confession, Derek. I said it quietly. Page 4. You should have read it. Simultaneously, as Weston later confirmed, a tactical team from the FBI entered the recovery wing at Honor Health Scottsdale, where Vanessa was being prepared for discharge. She attempted to maintain her grieving wife performance, but the sight of Agent Torres and the cold steel circling her wrists shattered whatever remained of her composure. She did not go quietly. She went screaming, but not for Derek. She screamed for her attorney. Within the hour, both were in separate interrogation rooms at the Scottsdale Police Department, and the mutual betrayal began exactly as Weston had predicted. Derek, panicking, told detectives that Vanessa had masterminded everything, that he was merely a frightened husband following orders. Vanessa, calculating as ever, told Agent Torres that Derek was the sole architect of the poisoning plot, that she was merely a battered wife, afraid to disobey. The game of chamomile and smiles had ended exactly where it deserved, in matching steel bracelets and competing lies. They had spent 5 months as partners in my murder. It took less than 5 hours for them to become each other's prosecution witnesses. I stood at the window of the conference room, watching the patrol cars pull away with my son in the back seat. His jacket was pulled over his head, hiding from cameras that were already gathering in the parking lot. The desert sun was high and merciless, bleaching the asphalt white. I felt its heat through the glass, but nothing in my chest. The woman who would have wept was 5 months dead. The woman who remained simply watched the cars disappear around the corner, and whispered a single word to the empty room. Done. A courtroom is a theater where the truth is performed for strangers. 12 people who have never met you, never shared your table, never heard the sound of your teacup settling into its saucer. They sit in a box and decide whether the worst chapter of your life is real enough to punish. I walked into the Maricopa County Superior Court on the morning of November 17th with the understanding that my survival was about to become public record. The building smelled of old stone and floor waxed the dry, institutional scent of places where consequences are measured in decades. I took my seat in the front row of the gallery, the wooden bench cold and hard beneath me. Rosa sat to my right, her rosary threaded between her fingers, her lips moving in silent prayer. She wore a navy dress that made her look less like a housekeeper and more like what she truly was, a soldier attending the tribunal of a war she had helped win. Across the aisle behind the defense table sat the two people who had spent 5 months trying to erase me from the world. Vanessa wore an orange jumpsuit that drained the color from her skin, yet she maintained an expression of serene composure, the mask of innocence she had perfected across 3 states and at least 2 previous murders. Her attorney had styled her hair down, softening the angles of her face. Even in chains, she was performing. Derek sat beside her, and the sight of him struck me harder than I expected. He had lost weight, perhaps 20 pounds in the 4 weeks since his arrest. His charcoal suit, the one I bought for his birthday, hung from his frame like a costume borrowed from a larger man. His eyes were bloodshot, ringed with the purple of sleepless nights spent in a cell. He did not look at me. He stared at the scarred wood of the defense table as though it contained some answer he had been searching for and could not find. Have you ever walked into a room where your family is on trial for your murder and realized you feel nothing? Not satisfaction. Not grief. Just the flat calm of a woman who has already processed the worst and arrived at the other side. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Rachel Holden, a woman in her early 50s with a razor-straight posture and a voice that carried the authority of someone who had never lost a case involving elder abuse. She stood before the jury of 12 with no dramatics, no raised voice. Just facts delivered with the precision of a surgeon opening an incision. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "what you are about to see is not a movie. It is high-definition surveillance footage captured inside the victim's own home. It shows the defendants preparing and administering a lethal cardiac toxin to a 73-year-old woman, their own mother, over a period of 4 months. Watch carefully, because this is what greed looks like when it thinks no one is watching." The courtroom lights dimmed. The projection screen glowed blue-white, and suddenly I was watching my own kitchen, the kitchen where I had raised Derek, where I had hosted Thanksgiving dinners for 30 years, transformed into a crime scene. Camera 3. September 16th, 5:47 in the morning. Vanessa, in her silk robe, kneeling beside the foxglove bed. The footage was pristine, every movement captured in crystalline detail. Her hands selecting leaves with pharmaceutical precision. The ceramic bowl, the mortar and pestle. The cheesecloth, straining concentrated glycoside extract into a small amber vial. Her face throughout was calm, bored. The face of a woman performing a task no more remarkable than brewing coffee. A woman in the jury's second row, far left, pressed her hand to her mouth. The sound of a stifled gasp carried across the silent courtroom. Holden advanced to the next clip. Camera 5. September 21st. Derek seated at my desk, handing a cash-stuffed envelope to the man who had diagnosed me with executive stress. Their exchange was brief and damning. "Keep the diagnosis consistent. No blood work." The footage showed the man counting money without pretense. A transaction as casual as tipping a valet. Then came the footage that changed the atmosphere in the courtroom from clinical observation to visceral horror. Camera 2. September 28th. The living room. Derek and Vanessa on the sofa, sharing $400 wine. The audio system captured every syllable with merciless clarity. Once she signs, the insurance kicks in within 90 days. Derek's voice filled the courtroom. After that, nature takes its course. Several jurors shifted in their seats. One man in the back row closed his eyes. But Holden was not finished. She advanced to the final clip, the one that had broken something inside me the night I first watched it alone in my bedroom. Derek on camera, raising both hands in front of his face, shaking them in grotesque mimicry of my tremor. His jaw hanging slack. His eyes rolling. The falsetto voice, mocking, delighted, devoid of any trace of the child I had raised. Look at her hands shake, Vanessa. Just like a little bird dying in a cage. Vanessa's laughter full-throated. Genuine. The only authentic sound she had ever made in my home echoed through the courtroom speakers. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a whisper, not a shuffle. 12 strangers stared at the frozen image of my son's laughing face and understood, with the sudden completeness of a door slamming shut, exactly what kind of man they were dealing with. I sat perfectly still. Rosa's hand found mine on the bench between us, her fingers wrapping around my palm with a pressure that said I am here without requiring a single word. Holden called her first expert witness. Dr. Henry Nakamura rose from the gallery and walked to the stand with the measured dignity of a man who had spent his career in service of molecular truth. He adjusted his glasses, opened his briefcase, and began to dismantle any possible defense with the systematic patience of a professor delivering his final and most important lecture. He explained digitalis, its source in foxglove leaves, its mechanism of action on cardiac tissue, its ability to disrupt the electrical signals that keep a human heart beating in ordered rhythm. He described how concentrated doses produce a cascading failure. First arrhythmia, then cognitive deterioration, then organ damage, then death. He displayed the lab results from my T-sample alongside my blood work, drawing a line between the two with the absolute certainty of a scientist presenting irrefutable data. This was not accidental exposure, he testified. This was pharmaceutical-grade extraction, administered in graduated doses designed to mimic natural cardiac decline. Whoever prepared this understood pharmacokinetics at a professional level. He looked directly at Vanessa when he said it. She did not flinch, but her attorney's pen stopped moving. The defense attorney, a silver-haired man named Caldwell, whose reputation was built on reasonable doubt, leaned back in his chair with an expression I recognized from decades of business negotiations. The expression of a man recalculating his position. He whispered something to Derek, then turned his gaze toward me, with a focus that made the air between us feel solid. He was preparing his counterattack. And I was his target. Mrs. Holloway. Caldwell's voice carried across the courtroom as the judge called a brief recess. I could feel his strategy forming like a weather system, dementia, paranoia. A confused old woman who had imagined surveillance and manufactured evidence. He believed my age was my weakness. He had no idea what was coming. Rosa Delgado walked to the witness stand not with the gait of a housekeeper, but with the measured stride of a woman who had spent 8 years waiting for this exact moment. Her navy dress was pressed sharp enough to cut paper. She took the oath with her hands resting calmly in her lap and looked at the 12 strangers in the jury box as though they were the only people in the room who mattered. Because they were. Ada Holden approached with a gentleness reserved for witnesses who carry something more powerful than legal evidence. She carried moral authority. Rosa began with May, the first cup of chamomile. The gradual decline she witnessed from a distance. The trembling hands. The days Maggie could not remember conversations from an hour before. She described watching a woman she admired dissolve like sugar in hot water. Then, mid-July. The vial. The dosage chart. Dr. Nakamura. She produced the spiral notebook, its worn cover and blue ink entries, displayed on the courtroom projector. Dates, times, symptoms, T-intercepts, dilution logs, 4 months of documentation compiled by a woman who earned $14 an hour and risked everything. Holden played the audio recording. Vanessa's voice filled the courtroom cold, stripped of every trace of warmth. You are a 62-year-old cleaning lady, Rosa. Who would believe you over me? One phone call and Maria loses her nursing license. The recording continued to the final threat, about something far more permanent. Several jurors shifted forward. One woman was openly crying. The tinny quality of the recording amplified the casual cruelty, shrinking the courtroom to the size of that windowless laundry room where Rosa had stood alone with her fear and her hidden recorder. Have you ever heard courage reduced to an audio file? It sounds small, scratchy, almost insignificant. Until you realize the person holding the recorder knew she might die for pressing the button. Holden asked the question that would become the emotional center of the entire trial. Mrs. Delgado, you were threatened with physical harm. Your daughter's career was targeted. Why did you stay? Rosa was silent for 3 seconds. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of something ancient. In 2017, I was lying in a hospital bed. I weighed 91 pounds. My own son had been poisoning me with sleeping pills for months. To take my pension, my house, everything. Every doctor said depression. Every neighbor looked away. One person believed me. One person sat beside my bed and said, "Tell me what is really happening." That person was Margaret Holloway. The courtroom was completely silent. She hired a lawyer. She ran the blood tests. She saved my life when my own family was erasing me. Rosa's eyes found mine across the room one moment, brief and sacred. She did not just pay a bill. She gave me my daughter's wedding day. She gave me my grandchildren. Rosa turned back to the jury. I stayed because kindness is a circle. It saved my life in 2017. It saved hers in 2025. I was just returning the favor. The collective exhale that followed was not yet applause. It was the sound of 12 people understanding that this woman was not merely a witness. She was living proof that one act of compassion can outlive decades of cruelty. Caldwell stood. He looked at Rosa. He looked at the jury, the wet eyes, the clenched jaws, the woman pressing a tissue to her face. He sat back down. No questions for this witness. The gallery erupted. The judge gavelled 3 times before order returned. But the damage was permanent. Tommy Reeves took the stand next. 33 years old, face mapped by hard choices, jaw set with rigid determination. He wore a clean white shirt buttoned to the collar, the uniform of a man showing the court he had changed. Tommy had been a resident at the Holloway Recovery Center in 2021. He arrived weighing 130 pounds with track marks on both arms. My program gave him 18 months of treatment, job training, and the first stable housing he had known since 19. Holden led him through his testimony with brevity. Tommy described being approached by Vanessa in a parking lot in late September. She offered $15,000 to stage a hit-and-run targeting my vehicle on Scottsdale Road. She wanted it messy, Tommy testified. She said the old lady was dying anyway. This would just speed things up. Make it look random. Why did you refuse? Tommy looked at me. His eyes dark, fierce, carrying the specific loyalty of a man who remembers exactly who pulled him from the gutter, held mine. Because Mrs. Holloway is the reason I am alive. She paid for my treatment when nobody would look at me. I could not kill the woman who saved my life. He swallowed hard. So I warned Rosa instead. After that, there was no way I was walking away. The gallery stood. The thunder of applause, chairs scraping, hands meeting, voices rising filled the courtroom like a wave. The judge gavelled repeatedly, but the sound was almost perfunctory. The jury had already decided. I could see it in 12 faces that had entered as neutral observers and now looked at Derek and Vanessa with unified fury. Have you ever watched a room full of strangers decide they are on your side? It does not feel like victory. It feels like being seen finally, completely seen after months of being invisible in your own home, Caldwell whispered urgently to Derek. Derek's face was the color of old parchment, and Vanessa, for the first time since the trial, dropped her mask of serene innocence. What replaced it was something hollow and ancient. The expression of a predator who finally understands the cage has already closed. Tomorrow, I would take the stand myself. Tomorrow, Caldwell would aim his sharpest weapons at my age, my memory, my credibility. But tonight, as the courtroom cleared and Rosa squeezed my hand with fingers that had spent 4 months keeping me alive, I was not afraid. The woman Caldwell planned to cross-examine was not the confused, trembling patient they had manufactured with 5 months of foxglove tea. She was a 73-year-old nurse who had diagnosed her own poisoning, wired her own home, and hired her own forensic team. She was the woman who built 14 sanctuaries for the elderly, with nothing but her spine and her savings. And she was ready. The oath felt different when I was the one taking it. My hand rested on the leather cover of the Bible with the steady pressure of a woman who had spent 5 months earning the right to speak. I looked at the jury 12 faces I had studied for 2 days now, and saw them lean forward with a collective anticipation that told me everything I needed to know. They were ready to listen. The question was whether Caldwell could make them doubt. He approached the witness stand like a man who believed his experience was a match for my age. His silver hair was perfectly styled. His suit cost more than Rosa earned in 3 months. He smiled at me, the smile of a surgeon preparing to make the first incision. "Mrs. Holloway." His voice was warm, grandfatherly even. "You have had quite a difficult year. We are all very sympathetic to your situation." He paused for effect. "But I must ask, is it not true that you have been experiencing significant memory problems since at least June of this year?" I folded my hands in my lap. I let him have his moment. He produced a stack of medical records, the charts from the physician Derek had paid to misdiagnose me. He read aloud selectively. Patient reports cognitive lapses, signs of age-related decline, recommendation to reduce executive responsibilities. He placed each phrase into the courtroom air, like a brick in a wall he was building between me and my credibility. "Mrs. Holloway, given these documented cognitive issues, is it not possible that your interpretation of the surveillance footage was colored by paranoid ideation? That perhaps what you perceived as a conspiracy was simply," he spread his hands in a gesture of gentle condescension, "the confused fears of a woman whose mind was not functioning as it once did?" I waited. 3 full seconds of silence. I let the courtroom hold its breath. Then I spoke. "Mr. Caldwell," I began, my voice carrying the quiet authority of 4 decades in medicine. "I graduated from the University of Arizona College of Nursing in 1981. I spent 30 years in clinical practice, including 6 years in cardiac care at Tucson Medical Center. I have personally treated over 200 cases of digitalis toxicity in elderly patients because I ran facilities that housed people for whom cardiac glycosides were a standard prescription." Caldwell's smile flickered. "The symptoms of digitalis poisoning in a 73-year-old female are as follows." I listed them without notes, without hesitation. Cardiac bigeminy, progressing to ventricular tachycardia, xanthopsia, the yellow visual halos, nausea with a 2 to 4 hour post-ingestion onset, progressive cognitive deterioration proportional to cumulative dose. I paused. Shall I continue with the renal indicators, or is that sufficient to demonstrate that my memory is functioning adequately? A sound rippled through the gallery, not quite laughter, but the sharp exhale of people watching a predator realize it has cornered something with claws. Caldwell adjusted his tie. He pivoted, changed tactics, produced a tablet and played an audio recording. Derek had secretly made during one of my worst poisoning nights in September. My voice slurred, confused, struggling to recall basic information. He presented it as evidence of natural decline. I let the recording play to completion. Then I responded. That recording was made on September 19th, a date when my blood toxicity levels, as confirmed by Dr. Nakamura's lab analysis, were at their peak concentration. I was slurring because I had been given a near-fatal dose of cardiac glycoside that morning. I smiled at Caldwell without warmth. "The only thing that recording proves, counselor, is that the poison was working exactly as intended." Caldwell returned to his table. He shuffled papers. He whispered to Derek. He stood again, attempted one more angle, suggesting I had staged the cameras to manufacture evidence, but his voice had lost its authority. The jury was no longer looking at him. They were looking at me, and they saw what Caldwell had refused to see. Not a confused old woman, but the most dangerous witness in the building. Have you ever watched a man realize he has been arguing with someone far sharper than himself? It does not look like defeat. It looks like a man slowly putting down weapons. He realizes, we're never loaded. No further questions. Caldwell sat down heavily. Holden stood for redirect. She asked only one question. Mrs. Holloway, is there anything you would like to say directly to the defendant? I turned. For the first time in weeks, I looked at Derek. Truly looked at him. He was smaller than I remembered. Diminished. The charcoal suit hung from his shoulders like a flag on a windless day. His eyes finally met mine. And in them I saw terror. Not the terror of punishment. The terror of a child who has broken something irreplaceable and only now understands it cannot be repaired. You did not just poison my tea, Derek. My voice did not waver. You poisoned the only thing I spent my entire life building for you. I built 14 homes for strangers because I believed in protecting people, and you, my own son, decided I was worth more dead than loved. His face crumbled. For one heartbeat I saw the boy, the small frightened boy who used to fall asleep in my arms. But it lasted only a moment. I forgive myself for loving you blindly, I said. But I will never forgive you for choosing her over the truth. Not because of what it cost me, but because of what it cost you. I stepped down from the stand. The silence was so complete, I could hear the courthouse clock ticking through the walls. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 11 minutes. Rosa and I sat on a bench in the hallway, her rosary moving through her fingers, my hands resting still on my knees. We did not speak. Some silences are too sacred for words. The buzzer sounded at 4:27 in the afternoon. We filed back in. The forewoman stood a woman in her 50s with steady hands and clear eyes. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, guilty. On the count of attempted murder, guilty. On the count of financial elder abuse, guilty. On the count of insurance fraud, guilty. 4 counts. 4 guilty verdicts. The words fell like stones into still water. The judge sentenced Vanessa Crane to life without parole, her third known victim finally providing the evidence to end her hunt permanently. Derek received 18 years. The gavel struck with a finality that vibrated through the wooden bench beneath me. As the bailiff gripped Derek's arm, my son turned one last time. His lips moved, forming words I could not hear across the distance between us. I did not try to read them. Whatever he had to say, he should have said it before the first cup. The steel door closed behind him with a sound like the period at the end of a very long sentence. And I sat in that emptying courtroom, Rosa's hand warm in mine, and felt something I had not felt in 5 months. Peace. Terrible, earned, irreversible peace. Peace is not silence. Peace is what remains when every lie has been burned away and you are left standing in the ashes, deciding what to build next. I learned that on December 2nd, exactly 48 days after the verdict, when I sat alone in an empty office on McKinley Avenue with a stack of incorporation papers and a pen that felt heavier than any weapon I had ever held. The building was modest. 2 stories, red brick, built in 1962, the same year. My father opened his first hardware store 3 blocks away. I chose it deliberately, not because it was impressive, but because it was honest. No marble lobby, no glass tower reaching toward a sky it could never touch. Just solid walls, wide windows that let the Arizona winter light pour across hardwood floors, and a front door that opened without a key card or a security code. Anyone could walk in. That was the point. I named it the Holloway Elder Protection Foundation. 14 senior living communities had made me wealthy. They had also made me a target. For 44 years I had built systems designed to keep elderly people safe within walls, medication schedules, fall prevention protocols, cognitive enrichment programs, dietary monitoring. I had never once considered that the greatest danger to an old person might wear a wedding ring and call her mom. Now I knew better. and knowing demanded action. The incorporation papers were straightforward. A 501c3, dedicated to 3 missions. First, funding independent toxicology, screening for elderly individuals whose families controlled their medical access. Second, establishing a legal rapid response team attorneys specializing in elder financial abuse who could intervene within 72 hours of a report. Third, creating a national hotline staffed by former nurses, social workers, and this was Rosa's idea. Survivors. Survivors like her. Survivors like me. I signed my name 14 times across those documents, and each signature felt like a brick being laid in a wall that would outlast me. My attorney, Diane Okafor, witnessed every page. She had been with me since 2014, back when Holloway Senior Living was still fighting zoning battles in Tempe. She never flinched, never wavered, never once suggested I was making a mistake. You are giving away approximately 68% of your remaining liquid assets, she said. Not as a warning, but as a confirmation. I know. The remaining 32% will sustain you comfortably for the rest of your natural life, assuming modest inflation adjustment. I know that too. She smiled not broadly, but with the kind of warmth that passes between women who have both survived something they do not need to name. Then let's make it official. The Foundation's board would consist of 5 members. I appointed Diane as chair. Dr. Henry Nakamura, the pharmacologist who had confirmed the digitalis in Rosa's first stolen sample, agreed to serve as medical director. A retired FBI agent named Sandra Killian, who had spent 20 years investigating elder fraud cases, accepted the investigative oversight role. The 4th seat went to a woman I had never met in person but whose work I had followed for a decade. Professor Amara Jenkins from Arizona State University's School of Social Work, whose research on financial predation in family structures had predicted, almost exactly, what had happened to me. The 5th seat remained empty. I was saving it. On December 15th, I sold the Highland Park estate, 4,200 square feet of travertine and imported Italian tile. A pool I had not swum in since Arthur died. A garden where foxglove still grew in neat rows along the western wall. The buyer was a non-profit called Desert Shield that operated transitional housing for elderly abuse survivors. They paid $3.2 million below market value by nearly $1 million. And I did not negotiate. I wanted that house to become what it should have been all along, a place where frightened people found safety instead of poison. Rosa helped me pack. We moved slowly through rooms that held 40 years of memory. Arthur's study, Derek's childhood bedroom with the solar system mobile, still hanging from the ceiling, the kitchen where I had once taught a small boy to crack eggs without getting shell in the batter. Do you want to keep the mobile? Rosa asked, her hand resting on the doorframe of Derek's room. I looked at those painted planets Saturn with its glitter rings, Jupiter with a red dot made from a thumbtack and acrylic paint, and felt something shift in my chest. Not grief, not anger, something quieter. Acceptance, maybe, that the boy who made those planets no longer existed, and perhaps had not existed for a very long time. No, I said. Leave it for whoever comes next. Maybe it will mean something different to them. We moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on McKinley Avenue, 4 blocks from the Foundation office. Rosa took the 2nd bedroom without being asked. We did not discuss it. Some arrangements do not require discussion, they simply exist because they are correct. On December 29th, I received a phone call from a number I did not recognize. Mrs. Holloway? This is Thomas Reeves. Tommy. The boy, no. The man who had refused $15,000 to kill me, whose testimony had broken the jury open like an egg. I got my contractor's license, he said, and I could hear the pride vibrating beneath his careful voice. Passed on the first try. And I was wondering the Foundation office. I noticed the 2nd floor needs work. Electrical. Mostly. Some plumbing in the north bathroom. I could do it. Pro bono. If you'd let me. I sat on my new couch in my new apartment and pressed my palm against my sternum, where my heart, now clean, now steady, now entirely my own beat without digitalis for the first time in 7 months. "Tommy," I said, "the 5th board seat is yours if you want it." Silence. Then a breath that sounded like a man trying very hard not to cry. "Yes, ma'am. I want it." On January 2nd, 2026, the Holloway Elder Protection Foundation opened its doors. The first call came at 9:14 in the morning. A 71-year-old woman in Flagstaff whose grandson had been adding something to her evening tea. She did not know what. She only knew that she was forgetting things, that her hands shook, that her grandson had recently asked her to sign papers she did not understand. I took the call myself. "Tell me everything," I said. "Start from the beginning. I have time." And I meant it. I had nothing but time now. Clean, uncontaminated time. Every morning Rosa made chamomile tea from organic flowers. She grew herself on the apartment balcony, in terracotta pots she bought at a nursery in Mesa. I watched her steep the leaves. I watched the amber liquid swirl. I drank without fear. That is what survival looks like, in the end. Not a courtroom victory. Not a prison sentence. Not revenge, served cold or hot, or any temperature at all. It looks like a cup of tea you can trust. It looks like a door that opens. It looks like a phone ringing at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning, and a stranger's voice asking for help, and knowing finally, completely, without reservation, that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. The foundation was not my legacy. My legacy was simpler than that. I answered the phone. 6 months after the foundation opened its doors, I received a letter from Arizona State Prison Complex in Florence. The envelope was thin, single sheet. No photographs, no legal documents folded inside. Just one page of handwriting I had known since a 5-year-old boy first learned to form his letters at the kitchen table in Highland Park. His tongue pressed between his teeth in concentration, his father standing behind him saying, "That's it, son." Just like that. I did not open it immediately. I set it on the counter beside the kettle where Rosa's chamomile was steeping, and I looked at it the way you look at a door you have already decided not to walk through, with curiosity. Perhaps, but no longing. Rosa noticed. She always noticed. "You don't have to read it," she said from the balcony, where she was watering the terracotta pots. The chamomile plants had grown thick and wild in the summer heat, their white and yellow heads nodding in the June breeze like small suns bowing toward the earth. "I know, and you don't have to not read it either." I smiled at that. Rosa had a way of holding space for every possible version of a moment without collapsing it into a single expectation. It was, I had come to understand, the rarest form of love, the kind that does not ask you to be anything other than exactly what you are in the breath you are currently breathing. I opened the letter. "Mom, I know you probably won't read this. I wouldn't, if I were you. But I need to say it anyway, because the therapist here says accountability starts with words, even if no one is listening. I knew, not from the beginning, but from July. She told me you were declining naturally, and I chose to believe her, because believing her was easier than losing her. That is not an excuse. That is the ugliest truth I have ever written down. I am sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I just need you to know that I remember the solar system mobile. I remember the eggs. I remember Dad's laugh when I got shell in the batter. Every single time. Those memories are still real, even if I became someone who doesn't deserve them. Your son, Derek." I read it once. Then I folded it along its original creases, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it in the top drawer of my desk beside Arthur's watch and the deed to the McKinley Avenue building. I did not cry. I did not feel the hot surge of rage that had sustained me through October, November, December. I felt something I can only describe as weather, a front passing through, changing the pressure in the room, and then moving on toward a horizon I could not see and did not need to follow. Forgiveness is a word people use as though it were a single action, a door you open or keep shut. But I have lived 74 years on this earth, and I have learned that forgiveness is not a door. It is a climate. It changes slowly, imperceptibly. Across seasons, you cannot rush. Maybe one day the weather inside me would shift enough to write back. Maybe it would not. Both possibilities lived inside me without conflict, and I let them. That evening, the foundation hosted its first annual gala at the Desert Shield House, the old Highland Park estate, now painted warm terracotta instead of its former sterile white. The foxglove garden replaced with raised beds of vegetables tended by residents. 73 people attended. Diane gave the keynote. Sandra Killian presented data. In 6 months, the foundation had intervened in 41 cases across Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada. 14 criminal referrals. 9 protective orders granted. 3 convictions already secured. Tommy's renovation of the second floor had been completed in March on time, under budget, and beautiful in its simplicity. I did not give a speech. I sat at a round table near the back with Rosa, drinking sparkling water, watching strangers whose names I was still learning laugh and talk and argue about policy in a house that had once been designed to display wealth and was now designed to protect life. The irony was not lost on me. Nothing was lost on me anymore. Poison had sharpened my attention the way grief sharpens memory, by removing everything that does not matter until only the essential remains. At 9:45, after the last guest had gone and the caterers were stacking chairs, Rosa and I walked home along McKinley Avenue. The desert night was warm, 81 degrees, dry. The sky, a bowl of stars undimmed by the modesty of our neighborhood's streetlights. Our shoes made soft sounds on the sidewalk. Neither of us spoke for 2 blocks. Then Rosa said, "The chamomile is ready for a second harvest." Already? Arizona sun. It grows fast when you let it. I thought about that. Growth. Speed. Trust. The way a plant does not ask permission to bloom, it simply reaches toward whatever light is available and becomes what it was always capable of becoming, regardless of what grew in the same soil before it. We climbed the stairs to our apartment. Rosa put the kettle on. I sat at the small kitchen table, nothing like the mahogany conference table where this story began, nothing like the cold steel tables in courtrooms or hospital rooms or police stations. Just a simple wooden surface, scarred with use, warm under my palms. Rosa poured 2 cups. The steam rose in the lamplight, curling and dissolving like every fear I had carried, and finally set down. I lifted the cup. Chamomile clean, golden, grown 4 feet from where I sleep by hands I trust with my life. I breathed it in. I drank, and it was good. Not because the tea was exceptional. Not because the night was beautiful, though it was. Not because justice had been served, though it had. It was good because I was alive to taste it. Because the woman across from me was alive to share it. Because somewhere in Flagstaff, a 71-year-old grandmother was sleeping safely tonight because a phone rang on a Tuesday morning and someone answered. That is the whole story. Not a story about poison, in the end. A story about what grows in the space where poison used to be. Drink your tea. Trust the hands that made it. And if you cannot trust them, if something whispers in the back of your mind, the way Rosa once whispered to me, then listen. Listen with everything you have. Your life may depend on a single word spoken at the right moment by the right person. Mine did.